AJ+C has been doing student housing for a long time, and certainly AJ+C's got a real history in residential, and now that student housing is actually emerging as a completely separate discipline, we can actually transfer our huge experience in residential to student housing, because I think you've got to make clear that student housing is not, a sort of a boarding house with people just kind of crammed in. However, this is actually a real market segment where people are building things for students, and they're really competing in a marketplace which is quite competitive. So they've really got to have something which is appealing and has real quality about it. AJ+C has had a lot of experience in student housing. We did the sums recently. We realised it was over 6,000. It's a huge number. And also we're looking at the map. They're all over the place, from the tropics down to temperate south. We've got major projects in Brisbane, quite a lot in Sydney, quite a few in Perth and in regional centres as well. We're bidding on some work in Tasmania at the moment, so we hope to add that state to our list. But I guess when you put them all together, you wouldn't really see them and say, well, that's the AJ+C buildings, because each one's got that particular climatic or client or particular university different requirements. So each of those, I suppose, the only common thread running through them is the AJ+C approach to respecting the client, the site and the program, and fusing those things into really good architecture. So the three things you need to get right in a student accommodation project, it's really, first of all, it's got to work financially for the client. So it's got to be affordable for the students to live there. And that's got to be a balance between making a fantastic building and making it affordable. Otherwise, no one's going to move in. This is paramount, because students don't have a lot of money. Everyone knows that. The other thing is perhaps the mix of that gradation of common to fully public spaces. You've got to get that balance completely right, whereby at the public interface of the building there's a open space or a public space or a pool or something like that, which is like an interface. And then you've got to really carefully balance that gradation from that fully public face down to the very private space. So at the other end of the extreme, you have a private room which has got all the facilities a student needs. It's got to be acoustically private. They've got to feel safe living there. And in between, you've got to have these common spaces, kitchens, that sort of thing, where they can get together. So, and the other thing is the amenity. You've got to have ample natural light. You've got to have good things like cross ventilation, all that sort of stuff. We think is really fundamental, because you can't have people that they're living there all year. They're not living there for a couple of weeks. They're living there all year. So it's got to be as well designed as an apartment building and as comfortable to live in. Well, look, students, I guess, hard to say what students are looking for, but everyone's a little bit different, and I suppose that's what we try and bring to the project, is to say that we try to provide a mix of spaces or to create a community, because you've got people who, for example, overseas students who have just come here from mainland China or something, don't know anybody, don't really know the culture. They've got a place where they can feel at home. You've got local students who are going to uni with a bunch of their mates who they've just been to school with. They might want to have a shared apartment they can fit in together. So this is the thing, that we try to create such a mix of things that you can fit everyone in. Well, communal spaces, it really does depend on the particular operator and the particular situation. So it's hard to generalise. Sometimes we have, if we build things, for example, Robert Menzies College, we built it for it's a Christian-based college, and they had a very particular sense of how their pastoral care model was going to work. And so that meant they had breakout spaces and kitchenettes on each level where people could come together and cook, and that would be organised because you had a resident on each floor who'd look after the students. You have other models where they're less disciplined about that sort of stuff, where they let students kind of create their own communities. So you have a real range of spaces, some with kitchens, some without. So each project's got its own particular thing about it that we always try and get hold of very early on to help us decide exactly what kind of spaces are in there. But each of them is really tailored to each project. Well, each project it's almost like the most crucial thing about the project is the client. I mean, they're the people who want the building made, and we bring our experience to the table, but it's always with open ears, talking to the client about how they have run things to date and how they would like to run things in the future. So really the client is the most crucial thing. As I said before, about there were some models that have a very particular hands-on approach with their students, and others that allow students to the freedom to really create their own communities. So we always say our best projects are the ones where we have an excellent client and we have a good relationship with the client, because they are the bedrock of every project. Postgrad students have a different set of needs. They're maybe not kind of sampling the delights of life and student life as sort of vigorously as a lot of undergraduates. So they're people who've been at uni 3, 4, 5 years, and they sort of know what they're about, or they've been out of uni for a while and they've come back to do further education. So often they're people with families, and they're just not perhaps as into sort of sharing a 6-bed dorm with a bunch of other undergrads. We often do more studio-based accommodation for postgrads, and there's often a sense that they might have a kind of a separate set of study areas and things, because they've got a different lifestyle. They've got a different sort of pace of life to undergrad students. They've also often got a bit more disposable income, so they can afford to have a studio which is, say, more expensive than a dorm, for example. And they may also be more interfaced with things like conference facilities, because those sort of slightly higher level facilities are often used for, say, out of semester lectures and courses and things, where you might have visiting academics who also use the space. So it actually becomes kind of academic come postgrad space rather than just a strictly student space. We really are seeing a lot of mixed use in student housing, and gone are the days when it was a barrack somewhere on a university campus with nothing to do with the rest of the world. These things are now, I think, also due to development pressures, they're often placed in a more urban setting. For example, we're working on several projects for major universities in Sydney which have large campuses, but the sites that are most appropriate for development are on the street network. So therefore you have a cafe or something like that, which is often, we like to talk about our projects almost as this sort of gradation of spaces from completely public down to this very private and intimate. These spaces, which they're almost like the first thing you see when you come to these developments, and they're the real public face of these things. So be it a cafe or a conference room or sort of a public foyer or a public space or something, they're really setting the scene and setting the identity for these things. So we really enjoy putting these things in developments. Clients do as well. I mean, we do a lot of projects which have, say, a pool or a gym or a yoga space or multi-purpose space like that sort of thing, because it adds to that sense of community and things that students can do within the place where they live, rather than having to go down the road to the gym, or it really brings people together. I think you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the student, I suppose. And what they're looking for, first of all, is something which is affordable for them, something which suits their lifestyle and has got facilities they want and need. So the crucial thing to try and do that as architects is to make sure that the project you do is always as efficient as possible without compromising amenity. So if you can bring it in for a good price, then the students are going to be able to afford to live there. And they're also going to enjoy living there because, as I said before, we've got things like pools and gyms, common spaces, yoga rooms, common kitchens, that sort of stuff that really, they move there and they feel like they're moving in with the community. It's not like you're just on a shelf somewhere in a barrack. So I suppose that's what with our various projects, that's the thing that we've come to realise. For example, one we did in Mount Lawley in Western Australia for the Edith Cowan University. We had a big open courtyard area with a pool in the middle, and what they did every orientation week, they had a barbecue set up with the pool to get people, and it was free barbecue, and students love free food. So they came down, got chatting, and the pool became this real sort of focal point for the students. That just got things rolling. from that point on, rather than just leaving them to their own devices from day one. So it was quite a successful element. The thing that differentiates a good project from a great project is always a good client. It could sound simple, but it's actually the most fundamental thing, because they're going to operate the building, they're giving us the brief, and you've got to have a good rapport with the client, and the client has got to be on board in terms of quality, because they are going to run this thing for the next 20 or 50 years or whatever. So every decision you make now is going to affect their operating and just how everything looks and works over the long term. And they've got to understand that there are things you do now that may cost a little more, but actually will save money in the long run and result in a better looking building and something which will hold its value, and people will respect that value. I think if you have something which is going to start looking tatty after a couple of weeks, often these things they just get ruined. But if you have something which is really stands the test of time, I think people respect that, and they last. The other thing is to say that to have a good rapport with a client, is that what I touched on before, it's just, in my experience when I've had clients I've really enjoyed working with, it really isn't like going to work. It's actually just like doing something together, which is quite fun, and they're really quite, I guess they give respect to us for what we're doing, and we give them respect for what they're doing. And that way we actually get the best result, because both of us are doing the things we're best at, and it just fits together properly. So yeah, that's can't go past a good client. Sustainable design, it's kind of funny putting it in a separate discipline, I suppose. AJ+C has always had an attitude towards sustainable design. A lot of these things are now being codified in legislation or whatever, so it's all become very formal. But we always look at things like getting a good orientation as the most basic thing. This building has to face the right way to get the sun, to get the breezes. That is essential, because if you have rooms that don't get sunlight, they're never getting to get any better. They're behind the eight ball right from the start. I mean, other things are like, I think I've had this situation quite a few times where you don't want to scrimp on things like acoustic insulation and this sort of stuff, where you just need to make the place a comfortable place to live, where you can get a good night's sleep even if your undergraduate buddies down the hall are having a party. Simple things like that often look a little bit extravagant, but always pay off in the long run, I think.